Good evening, everybody. I would like to call this meeting into session, the regular City Council meeting of June 26, 2018. And we do have an open forum before we begin the meeting. And I'm going to call everybody up one by one to talk. And this may be the first time folks coming and speaking at the open forum, so I want to welcome you all. Thank you for coming. And just a couple housekeeping notes about what the open forum is. So the open forum is not a discussion with council members. It is an opportunity for folks to come up and talk to, present and share ideas that folks have to the council. And you have 3 minutes, and you are not allowed any more than 3 minutes. And we do ask that you please keep your comments as concise as possible. And if somebody said something that you were going to say, we ask that you please don't repeat, but just add to what has already been said. And because we do have 6 or 7 folks that are here to speak, we will do all of those before the meeting. But normally what happens is we will do it for the first 15 minutes, and any other folks who want to speak can finish speaking at the end of the council meeting. So we will get started with Chris Johnson. If Chris is here, if you can please come up to the microphone and put your name in, and we'll start with your 3 minutes.
I'd like to address the Lyndale Reconstruction Project plan that was approved on June 12th. In the opinion of my family and some of my neighbors, the goals to improve safety and the livability for the people who live in this neighborhood isn't being met by this plan as currently designed. The 10-block area of mature trees should not end up looking like 66th Street does at this point. Improving the road is definitely needed, and calming the traffic is a good idea, but what is being proposed with 4 roundabouts in that 10-block section doesn't meet the needs of the people for walking, biking, and daily commuting in this area. The plan makes it very daunting for several neighbors to be able to even access that road going north or south on Lyndale once there's a roundabout at 70th. There will be no stopping of traffic, which is currently dealt with by the stoplights at 70th on Lyndale. And that's the way most of the seniors in the neighborhood cross the road to make their way to the central hub area of there. Crossing Lyndale by foot as a family with young kids in tow would not happen in this area. On top of it, the amount of traffic that is in this area on any given school day, with 2 high schools and a couple elementary schools all crossing through that 70th and Lyndale area, will not allow for daily commuter traffic to proceed as it currently does in this plan. We do not need to cut down the trees in this area. It's the last mature section of trees on a major thoroughfare through this town that hasn't been disturbed and cut down. And adding 2 bike lanes and losing the urban canopy that we have currently is not an acceptable improvement to the livability of this area for most of us in that neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And did you sign your information in?
Yep.
Thank you. We have Larry Koch next.
Thank you. My name's Larry Cook. I live in Chanhassen. I represent Nola Wagner in this case. I'm also here to talk about the Lyndale Reconstruction Project. I spoke at the last meeting, but I wanted to bring you up to speed with what has happened, since the day of that meeting. I want to thank you, first of all, for encouraging Mr. Brose to reach out to me to discuss the Lyndale and 70th changes. I had a meeting with Mr. Brose, I believe it was on the 12th, where he went over his view of the plan. But first of all, I want to state that I'm concerned that I think the council members came away with the wrong impression at the last meeting, an impression that somehow the neighborhoods, including my client, had not spoken up about the issues that they had with that roundabout. Quite to the contrary. They have appeared at many of the meetings, have given written comment cards objecting to it. In fact, at the November meeting, the November open house, the majority of the people who commented on the roundabouts said they did not want roundabouts, and they expressed their concerns about those. But what I find is kind of troubling is that as I've gone through the information that Mr. Brose and Jeff Pearson, I believe it is, have provided me, and I want to say I have not been able to go through all of it. I just got it yesterday and today. But so far, I don't see where those concerns about the roundabout were carried through to any of the subsequent open houses or were presented as a concern, and I certainly know that they were not presented to you members at the last meeting. So I think that there is maybe a misunderstanding about my client and the community addressing this. The other thing I wanted to point out is that we have found a MnDOT study that shows that single lane roundabouts are more dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists than what the interchange was before. And we were happy to provide copies of this. I did not bring copies with it. It's several pages. So based on that, my client would like to have the members here, the council, vote to have the proposed roundabout at 70th replaced with a stoplight so that people can cross safely, either pedestrians or cyclists, and so that in particular my client and the people living on Oak Grove will have an opportunity to enter onto Lyndale to go north. Now there is...
If you can please wrap up your comments. You have
Sure.
30 seconds.
So-
Thank you.
No, thank you very much. So therefore, we don't see a need for a roundabout. It has been admitted that it's not a safety issue. There's no need for a roundabout. A light will do fine, and it will limit the adverse impact on my client and the other neighbors. And I have a letter that I will submit for the record that if you'd like to review it.
Thank you, Mr. Cook.
Thank you.
We have Carol Anderson next.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for allowing this dialogue. Thank you for giving us a chance to give input. And I think a lot of people in this room are familiar with the area that we're talking about. We're talking about 70th and Lyndale and the entrance to Oak Grove Boulevard. One thing I do want to say is I'm not against roundabouts. I think in the right place, they're great. And I'm also happy to know that maybe we won't have 4 lanes of traffic on Lyndale anymore. That's been so busy. And I do want to give my point of view from when we first moved to Richfield a long time ago, several decades ago. They had no traffic light on 70th and Lyndale. And it was next to impossible to get out on Lyndale Avenue. And even the kids who went to the our kids went to the elementary school, they had to bus them because that was such a dangerous street. Since then, when they put that light in, everything changed. It was just amazing. People started crossing back and forth. We had 3 grandchildren whose parents moved out of the city, 1 in Egan and 3 in Bloomington. They chose to go to Richfield High School. So they came to our house early every morning and came back to our house crossing on 70th and Lyndale with a traffic light safely. And my husband and I also have a little sheltie that we walk along Lyndale Avenue going over to Richfield Lake. And we've walked that walk any time of the day, and it's amazing. The traffic is steady, even more than it is in rush hour, but even not rush hour, it's steady. The nice thing about the traffic light is it has to stop sometime, and that is making it much more pedestrian safe. I really like what you're doing. We have a beautiful new street. I like some of the ideas you're doing, but I see that is not a safe place to have a roundabout, and I'm asking, please let us keep our traffic light. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave Huss is next.
Hello, I'm Dave Huss. I'm also a resident of Richfield and live on Oak Grove Boulevard. I'll hand in my script that I was going to read from because most of it's been said. I've been in Richfield for 24 years. Up until 3 years ago, I lived on 73rd and DuPont. So the thoroughfare of about 73rd through 68th has been most of the miles my wife and I have driven in the last 24 years, you know, going to Holy Angels, Blessed Trinity, and using Wood Lake a lot, walking, biking. So I understand that intersection very well as both a pedestrian, a biker, and in an automobile. The light has served its purpose well. It's proved itself as being safe. So I don't really see why we should experiment with changing it, because I agree with Carol. I don't know that our block is boycotting roundabouts. It's just a poor application for this. I can't pretend to be an engineer and re-engineer a better idea, but I would reiterate the comment made that my wife and I went to 3 of the 4 meetings. We shared a lot of the exact concerns that are in the letters that I'm going to hand over to you, and that is basically safety. This isn't about we don't want our block to change. We want to keep it safe, and not just for ourselves, but other people. My kids are on their way out of the house, being grown up and all, so they're not a factor in that pedestrian safety thing, but my wife and I will be here probably forever, so we'll always be part of that. We always go up to 70th and push the button to cross, which we do frequently, and I can't imagine that there is some alternative that's going to, you know, provide a more safe environment for pedestrians and bikers. And the fact that a lot of these ideas, concerns were expressed at all of the open houses and weren't mentioned at all the last meeting, I was a little bit disappointed. And I would agree that I think some of the information was a misrepresentation of what I saw to be the case at the meetings, the open house meetings. I'll leave it at that, unless you have questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. Next, we have Jackie Hayes.
Hi. Oh, you got your... Hi, thanks for a few minutes here. I live on Oak Grove, and I'm here to check in on a couple of things related to the reconstruction project. So I attended all of the open houses and provided a lot of feedback about how we might think through together ways of making it safest on the intersections of both Oak Grove and Lyndale and 70th and Lyndale. I recall standing next to a gentleman who uses a walker who said that there's no way he's ever going to be able to cross. He's going to need to drive, and he has sat there with me and made the decision that he goes to McDonald's or something. Anyway, he couldn't imagine a way that he could get across that roundabout safely. He'd have to rush. Who's going to stop and pause and wait for him to take the time he needs to make that cross? So I'm concerned that we're not making the safest choice for a very special intersection that includes people coming in and out of Oak Grove, because that's an access to the Wood Lake. This is, you know, to compare this to Portland is not a fair comparison. We have a different kinds of humans coming in and out of that intersection. The high school's right there. It just seems like we should do everything we can to keep it controlled, and I would strongly recommend that we keep a light there and not the roundabout. I also want to say a piece about process. I came to the council meeting last couple of weeks ago and was surprised to hear that after the proposal goes through approval at City Council, then neighbors who are directly impacted get time to think through the proposal. And I want to recommend that that be flipped. You know, those who are directly impacted by something like this really ought to be contacted before a proposal comes before the council. I think you would want that, you know, so that it's informed by that information. So I want to request both that that piece of process happen and that the time, energy, and thinking through that went in on the part of many of us on those open houses be represented somehow in what was submitted to you guys. It feels like that's entirely missing, and it seems not a true representation of the conversations and the input. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, we have Kevin Cately.
Hello. I'd like to say thanks to the neighbors for being very eloquent on what they were talking about. Yeah, pretty much what I had to say was what they had to say, but I wrote something down, so I'm gonna present it. The process that is in place by your transportation committee to get the awareness of this project and its communication of the project to the people most affected by the reconstruction is flawed. Myself and my wife were unaware of this project and heard about it from our neighbor, and he wasn't sure of the details. My wife and I attended the council meeting, and we were surprised to hear that the council would be voting on this proposal. Councilman Howard asked for a delay, 2-week delay, and was shot down immediately by another person over there, basically saying time restraints were the reason why. I feel that the project is short-sighted and unsafe. The roundabout and bike paths are unwarranted and will be unsafe for the public in general, not to mention driving difficulties. Trying to take a left exiting Oak Grove Boulevard onto Lindale will be very difficult without current stoplight. I also think the reconstruction of Oak Grove Boulevard and the bicycling paths are not applicable to the area. Oak Grove, the street is very picturesque, and it has a lot of beautiful oaks on it, and the way you enter it is kind of a neat way. It's more of an angled way rather than what you guys propose or the Transportation Committee proposes to move the easements over, and I don't know how many feet, but I do know that 25 feet of Lindale easement's going to go, and then another 25 to 30 feet of easement on Oak Grove's going to go. I'm not sure if that's a good idea. You know, I would like to see the process, kind of what Jackie said, flipped. I think the owners that are most affected should be heard or at least informed about this project. Because I really believe that, you know, you had open houses, but my input on the open houses were they weren't taking feedback. They were just telling you what's going to happen. There was no ideas formulated by the neighbors that I heard of. And I'm not an engineer neither, and I don't know what it would take, but I think the consideration by the council should take some time. I don't think that should be fast. I really liked what you had to say, Councilman Howard, and I believe you were on the right track. I'm not sure what the obstacles are in this project, but I would like it to slow down. And I thank you for the time. Thank you.
Thank you. That is the end of our forum. Are there any updates at all or any input from staff before I close it? Oh, hello. Yes, Director Asher.
Thank you, council members. I'm Kristen Asher, the Public Works Director for the city, and I just was going to go over a couple of the next steps, and I kind of feel the urge to maybe respond to a couple of the comments that were made, if that's okay.
Yes, go ahead.
And I just want to be clear that the approach that we take when we take on a project like the reconstruction of Lindale, and I know Councilmember Howard knows this because he was on our commission early on in this process, is a community-based design. We don't defend our design. We bring an aerial of the existing road and we have post-it notes and we say what's working and what's not working on the street. And we do that for the first 2 meetings and we listen to it. We develop a problem statement and we develop goals for the project. The goals for Lindale were to make it safer for everyone because everybody had issues with Lindale pedestrians, bicyclists, and vehicles. So I'm confident that the design that is proposed and was approved is appropriate for Lindale and Richfield, including the roundabouts at 70th, or the roundabout, all the roundabouts. That whole area will be slowed down, and Jack did a really good job of explaining that last meeting. I'm not saying it's the only design, I'm just saying I think it's appropriate because it was built on feedback from this community. And we have all the comments and everything to go along with that. But we do use a community-based design. Everybody that will be impacted by the project directly along Lindale was contacted multiple times. We were actually knocking on doors to people that will have a bigger impact, so we've reached out to all those people. The people that will reach out after in the next phase of the project are the people that maybe didn't show up to the open house and that actually will live on Lindale, and maybe we might need a little easement to regrade your yard to give you an expectation of what the construction will look like so they know what to expect. I mean, we also have a process to go through, like community amenities along the corridor. We don't talk about public art before a project's approved. We talk about it in the final design process. So it's those kinds of outreach that we were talking about. We also, the Oak Grove residents in particular, we did have a meeting scheduled to talk to them about their concerns, and I would expect we could alleviate a lot of the safety concerns. The sight lines will be much improved. I think the access to and from Oak Grove in the proposed design is so much safer, and we can explain that to you and have a dialogue. That was postponed, and I don't know if the residents are still interested in having that meeting, but we are, and anybody else that is interested. So our next steps are just that, to get hopefully back in touch with the Oak Grove 70th and Lindale neighborhood to talk about the things that they talked about tonight and last meeting, and then also to outreach more and things like that. So I think that might have been everything I was going to say. But.
Thank you, Director Asher, for that update. And I do hope the residents take the director up on meeting with her. And I did ask that the council members be invited to that meeting as well. So is there any remaining comments on the council before I close the open forum? Okay. Thank you very much for coming, folks, to the open forum. It's much appreciated, and we look forward to hopefully meeting with you after this. So we will be moving to the next portion of our meeting, and at this point, I ask everybody to please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. At this time, I will move the approval of the minutes of the Special City Council work session of June 12th, 2018, and the regular City Council meeting of June 12th, 2018.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The minutes are approved. And I would like to call up our Chief Henthorn for the swearing in of several new officers.
Member Reagan Gonzalez and City Council, I want to welcome tonight's city staff, residents, guests, and those watching at home. I'm very honored and privileged tonight to administer the oath of office to our 4 newest officers. These officers exemplify the department mission, which is to safeguard the lives and property of the people we serve, to reduce the incidence and fear of crime, and to enhance the public safety while working with the community to improve their quality of life. These 4 officers have completed a month-long academy along with a rigorous field training program where they are taught to police the Richfield way. These officers just completed their probationary status on a year probation that ended on June 20th. Before I administer the oath, I would like to recognize those that are here in attendance that have supported them along the way to becoming Richfield police officers. McCabe Storia, the entire Storia family, and there's a lot here. Lindsay Nelson, his grandparents, and Kong Zhang. Officer Chris Barber, Kayla Ostrander, Diane Barber, and Charles McCree. Haley Kwambeck, Alyssa Dibvig, and Ron Kwambeck, Erica Kwambeck, and Todd Bristol. Matt Hotzler, wife Brandy Hotzler, Jackson and Elaine Hotzler, Rick and Lori Hotzler, and sister Erin Hotzler. These are the people that support these officers day in and day out, like all our families that are involved in the Department of Public Safety and the Richfield Police Department that support all our officers. Without family members supporting our officers, they wouldn't be able to come to work and provide the services that they do every day to our citizens. So now I will administer the oath of office. Repeat after me. Raise your right hand. I state your name. Do solemnly swear to support the Constitution and the laws of the United States, the state of Minnesota, and the charter and ordinances of the city of Richfield, and to discharge faithfully the duties devolving upon me as a police officer for the city of Richfield to the best of my judgment and ability. Congratulations.
Thank you, Chief, for that presentation, and thank you to the new officers. We are very much indebted to you for your service and commitment and passion to protecting the community of Richfield and to working with us to build relationships with our residents and keeping our community safe. And thank you to the families as well, because we know that this is extremely tough work, and it can be scary at times as well. And thank you for supporting your family members to be on our police force and do the extremely hard work that they do. So thank you to those officers, thank you, Chief, and thank you to the families.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, I just wanted to also acknowledge the officers and their families. One of the things that the City Council does is we really support our police officers, and the reason we support them is because we believe in the works that they do. They're always, ready to accept whatever challenge. They're always ready to risk their own lives. They're always ready to be part of our community, and that is really what makes a good, solid police force. I think they've had great training, and the fact that their family supports them, it adds a lot of strength to the individual police officers. And we know we support them because we're really proud of them. And our hearts and our hats are always off to them for their continued good deeds and their hard work.
Thank you. Any other comments from council members? Thank you. Councilmember Troutman.
I was just going to say, just echo everything that you and Councilmember Garcia said, but just particularly proud of these officers, some of whom have already distinguished themselves and have already been honored here, and so we're glad to have them.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is Hats Off to Hometown Hits, and as always, we will start with Councilmember Garcia. Wait a minute, you guys aren't here for the very exciting city council meeting?
It's only a 2-hour meeting.
Councilmember Garcia.
I thought everybody had really nice comments.
Well, I only have 2 things. One thing is, I attended the dementia luncheon last week, and that was put on by the Richfield Advisory Board of Health in conjunction with, with the Bloomington Health Department too. And we had our council member Reagan Gonzalez, who is part of this whole dynamic discussion that's going on. And it's such a salient issue because, it affects someone that we know or someone that we love. And I really appreciated Councilmember Simon, who spoke from experience and from the heart and from somebody who knows about dementia because he's lived it, and he's experienced it, and I mean that really brings home something special when you have someone that can have such powerful testimony. So I appreciate Jennifer Anderson and Councilmember Reagan Gonzalez and Councilmember Troutman.
Yeah, thank you.
And then the other thing I wanted to mention was, we celebrated this afternoon before the council meeting the commissioners that serve on our numerous commissions. And, we really depend on these commissioners a great deal. They are advisory commissions, and believe me, they do advise. And they spend a lot of hours doing their homework, talking to residents, listening, contributing, being part of the life of this community. And they do it unselfishly, and they do it with a lot of class. And sometimes, some of these commissions take the brunt of a lot of the things that are kind of controversial, and that includes the Planning Commission and the Transportation Commission. And, we appreciate all their works and all their efforts, and that's about it.
Thank you, thank you, Councilmember Garcia. I'll move over to Councilmember Troutman.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Reagan Gonzalez. I know a lot of times we come and we talk about what's happening in the community in different events, but I just have two non-event hats off here this afternoon. The first, I had a couple of constituents that observed that it's Pride Month this month, and they asked what the city had done, and they pointed out that there had been a resolution a couple years ago about our values as a city that I think was well reflected, that we accept and we embrace all community members, and they pointed out that LGBTQ members weren't included in that resolution. And for whatever the reason, or I think that doesn't reflect the values, certainly of the council, of our community, and I told them, and I just want to take this opportunity, that we do love and we do embrace and we do appreciate everybody in our community, and particularly in Pride Month, which happens in June for folks that aren't aware because of what sometimes people call the Stonewall Riots or the Stonewall Rebellion. But it was really a group of people that didn't have access to the rule of law, and they didn't have access and inclusion and equitable treatment. And so I just want to affirm that and say that is part of our values. And I want to thank the residents that brought that to my attention. Also just want to take a moment over the last week or so, I've just had an opportunity to meet with so many of our city leaders and city staff and just take my hats off to them because we don't do this full time. We do this in our evenings and weekends, but we have just a tremendous core of leaders in the city who are here day in and day out and up nights and worrying, and they wake up trying to make our city better, and they succeed. And you are a blessing to our city and to our community. So to all our staff, but especially to our city directors, I just want to take my hats off and say thank you, guys.
Thank you, Councilmember Troutman. Councilmember Howard?
I just had a couple items, one that was mentioned last week, but again, wanted to remind folks and welcome folks to spend time in Richfield over the July 4th and thank our July 4th committee for an entire several days of fun activities, from kids night, which I know Calvin and the family are going to be excited about, all the way to professional wrestling, as the mayor mentioned last week. And so encourage folks to have some fun that weekend, and thanks to all the volunteers that make it happen. And then I too wanted to just mention our commissioner recognition event that we had tonight, recognizing all of our volunteers that decide that they want to take a role in their city, spend their time engaged in our decisions. And in my time on the council, my work with the commissions, the interviews with our commission members, and seeing that their work is one of the things that has just given me such pride in our city and a belief in our democratic process. I mean, just that at our lowest or our basic levels of government, we have neighbors that are getting involved in our city and participating in our decision making. And it's just such a big part of what makes Richfield such a strong community. And just had that on my mind tonight as we thank them for their service and all that they do for our city.
Thank you. And I will just echo Councilmember Garcia, her comments on the dementia-friendly kickoff event. So that was last week, and it's very exciting, and I think overdue initiative where we're really coming together as a community over the next 2 years and putting concrete changes into place so that we are better prepared, informed, and supportive of our community members facing dementia in Richfield. This is extremely important. I think on every single block, we have such a range of folks living in our neighborhood, and it's important to make sure we're checking in on our neighbors, we're providing support, and being a community that is compassionate and knowledgeable about how to support our neighbors with dementia, which there's an estimated over 750 residents in Richfield with dementia. And lastly, just to cover something that hasn't been covered yet, is just a reminder that there is a free lunch program for kids this summer. So it's free meals for children ages 18 and younger at our local parks here in Richfield. You can go to the city website and look at what dates the free lunches are at and the times, but they're around the lunchtime hour, and they're Jefferson Park, Washington Park. And there's no lunches provided the week of July 2nd through 4th, so next week. But please share with your neighbors, share with your families, and take an opportunity to bring your kids to the park over lunch hour and get a free meal and meet some neighbors. All right. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem,
Yes.
we have the minor amendment.
I thought it was after the approval of the agenda, before.
Before.
Okay. All right, I will turn it over to our city attorney.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem and council members. We just have a minor housekeeping amendment to the consent agenda. This is related to item 4E, consideration of the approval of the revised Richfield Parkway Infrastructure Construction Agreement and Maintenance Agreement. The consent agenda currently approves that by motion. We need to approve those items by resolution rather than motion. So I have placed a resolution in front of your chairs there. So what I would need from you, and this is necessary just for the closing and the land sale portion of the Chamberlain project. So what I would need from you is just a motion to revise item 4E of the consent agenda to adopt a resolution, and then you can proceed with onto the consent agenda.
Thank you very much, city attorney. I will make the motion to revise item 4E.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is passed. Second. Thank you. Now, on to the approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The agenda is approved. Next item on our agenda is the consent calendar with our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the City Council. For those here in the audience and those at home watching, the consent calendar contains several separate items which are acted upon by the City Council in one motion. And once that consent calendar has been approved, all the individual items have been approved, and as well as the recommended actions, and no further action on those items is necessary. Tonight we begin with item A, which is consideration of the adoption of a resolution establishing an absentee ballot counting board for the 2018 state primary and state general elections. Item B, consideration of the approval of 8 solar project agreements with Ideal Energies for the installation of solar panels on city facilities. Item C, consideration of the adoption of resolution approving the submission of the limited use permit with the Minnesota Department of Transportation for the 66th Street streetscape elements within MnDOT right-of-way. Item D, consideration of the adoption of a resolution approving an agreement related to the Minnesota Department of Transportation's Landscape Partnership Program. And then finally, item E, consideration of the approval of the revised Richfield Parkway Infrastructure Construction Agreement and the Maintenance Parcel Agreement between the City of Richfield and Chamberlain Apartments, LLC. That concludes tonight's consent calendar.
Thank you, City Manager Devich. I will move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The consent calendar is passed. The next item goes to Councilmember Garcia.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. This item is a consideration of a variety of land use approvals related to a proposal for a mixed-use development at 101 66th Street East, 66th Street and First Avenue. And I'm going to only read partial of the executive summary and then turn it over to Melissa, because I think she knows that she's breathed it, for many months already. And I having said that, I wanted to thank Melissa. Sometimes I was teasing her this earlier about it because I call so often, to ask one question or another, and she's always willing to take my calls, very patient, and I would really rely on her for for backup material and for kind of being an what I'm saying, going between the neighbors and the developer. So I certainly appreciate that. Anyway, PLH and Associates, the developer, is proposing a planned unit development that includes a 3-story mixed-use building with 31 residential units and approximately 6,000 square feet of commercial space. The proposed development provides active building uses and pedestrian emphasis along 66th Street, with parking provided underground and in a surface lot behind the building. The site is adjacent to the large commercial area centered on Nicollet Avenue and 66th Street, with low-density residential properties located to the south and east. And I have met numerous times. I have been to the open houses and have met with the neighbors and have really taken a lot of time in talking to those folks that are really involved and concerned about this one issue. So, Melissa, if you wanted to help me out here.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Garcia. I'll just start with a little bit of background about the study that the city undertook in this area. As part of the comprehensive plan, we've been studying this neighborhood around 66th and Nicollet. These parcels that are involved in this process were vacant for a number of years. It's the former site of a Baptist church and 2 other properties that were owned by the church. As part of our comprehensive plan, we looked at the hub area, the commercial areas, and then this parcel, which had been vacant for so long. The vision that the community decided upon was a mixed-use vision. It allowed for higher density housing, a variety of commercial uses, particularly emphasizing uses that would take advantage of what were trying to accomplish along 66th Street with our multimodal transportation, a much more walkable area, just a much more inviting streetscape, along with allowing for additional residential units in the area. So this project was coming forward as that comprehensive plan process was about a year in place. This project meets the objectives of the comprehensive plan amendment that is going through the process right now. It is out for public comment. As part of the neighborhood meetings, the developer has made a number of attempts to improve the project, make it more compatible with the neighborhood, more palatable to the neighborhood. Some of those modifications include a change to the buffering between the single-family homes and the development, enhancing the landscaping there, working with the adjacent property owners to find out what they would like to see adjacent to their property. The driveway related to the underground parking has been shifted at the request of the neighborhood. Staff and the developer have discussed, and it is now included in your plans, adding a bump out to the exit from the commercial space onto Stevens Avenue to physically prohibit right turns from the commercial space into that single family neighborhood. And then also we've, from the beginning, really worked with our Public Works Department and our emergency services departments to find out what they envision for this area, what they see as modifications to the street that could be made if in the future this development would create more of an impact than we're anticipating on that neighborhood. So the developer is here if there are additional questions. I'm happy to answer specifics or go over the stipulations in the resolution if you'd like to hear them. I think that everyone is relatively familiar with those, but I'm happy to answer questions.
I know this is not a public hearing, but I've talked to Mayor Pro Tem Reagan Gonzalez, and she's agreed that we can let the developer speak for 3 minutes, and also one of the Julie Lipinski, who's the spokesperson for the neighbors, speak for 3 minutes. So if the developer wants to come up and make a short, very short presentation. Mr. Lynch?
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing us to speak here tonight. My name is Paul Lynch. I'm the managing member of PLH & Associates, Real Estate Investment Company, Property Service and Construction Services. I brought with me tonight Ryan Anderson. He's the project engineer on this project from ISG Corporation, and he's done a bulk of the work on this project. And if you have any specific questions, I can certainly refer them to Ryan. But it's been over 2 years now. We've been talking about this project. It's been always planned as a mixed use from the get-go, and a lot of work, a lot of time has been put into this from our company side as well as ISG side, as well as investment within the neighborhood, and trying to meet all the demands and needs that this project has been put in a position to incorporate into the project, to make it what I hope is a project that everybody can embrace within the community, see the benefits of this project, and with that, if there's any questions, I'd certainly be willing to answer them.
Mr. Lynch, I think one of the big issues is the fact that you will probably want to place a restaurant in the 2,000 square feet allowed. Is that still your desire?
We have no tenants in mind at this. We've talked to no tenants, commercial tenants that is, for this property project. If there was a restaurant to come, I think there was a resolution or some kind of document that was put out by the staff that stated that there's a certain portion up to that would allow for a restaurant. And if a tenant did come to me, then yes, I would consider that.
Okay, because I'd like to support it, but I don't like the concept of the restaurant or maybe like a convenience store. I just think, I think that would really impact the neighborhood a great deal, so. Okay, anybody else want to have any questions?
Maybe I don't have so many questions for Mr. Lynch. Is glad to take your call yesterday, and I did ask at our work session for some proof of financing, and your banker did provide that, and he provided his phone number, and I reached out to the president of the bank, and we traded about 3 voicemails throughout the day. But so I didn't speak with him personally, but I'm one of my concerns has been thoroughly met. That I think I'm not concerned about that, but I did share those concerns with the community, and so thank you for providing that. I also shared some of the concerns with regards to a restaurant. My concerns are primarily with like a fast food restaurant as opposed to some of the other options, and so I would maybe ask staff and council, would it be possible to restrict fast food? I'd hate to see, I don't want to name any particular fast food chains, but any particular fast food chains coming into the space, but I wouldn't want to foreclose any coffee shop or any other, maybe higher scale or fast casual opportunity from ever coming in there. Would that be, before I offer it as an amendment, would such a thing be possible?
Councilmember Troutman, we do not have any ordinances that would allow you to specifically pull out fast food chains. Our restaurants are designated by class. So there are full service restaurants that serve alcohol. There are traditional restaurants that allow counter service, and there are fast food restaurants with drive-through service, which we have eliminated as an option here. We have eliminated any drive-through service, but we couldn't do more than that based on our ordinances.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lynch.
Just a quick question for staff on convenience stores. Is that also something that in this resolution, how does it would be a convenience store be treated based on our resolution?
Convenience stores are defined by our code, so those could be identified as a use that was prohibited in this location, or it could be something that was added. Right now, restaurant is limited to 2,000 square feet of the 6. You could put something in that would allow either a restaurant or a convenience store to occupy that 2,000 square feet rather than completely prohibiting them. That would be another option. But you could amend the resolution to add convenience stores because it is defined.
I guess I might be inclined to support. That's something I've heard from the neighborhood as well about the convenience store. At least as I've talked with folks, in my mind, I feel like there is a bit of a distinction there between that and perhaps a small scale coffee shop. I'd be curious what other council members think about putting the stipulation on the convenience store piece to limit that as a use, and then would also want to understand the right procedure or what motion would be in order in that regard.
Do we have a working definition of what a convenience store is? I think, like a CVS or a Walgreens, their business model could always change, but I would be shocked if they found that particular unit viable. So I would hate to foreclose other stores. I'm just not sure when we say convenience store, what do we mean?
Yes, if you would give me a minute, I will look up the definition. It is defined in the zoning code. It will just take me a minute.
That's a very obscure question that I asked, so thank you.
Excuse me. Are there any other questions for the developer, or if not, we can ask the resident to come and present while our staff is looking up the definition?
I just have one question, comment. I want to thank Mr. Lynch for the letter that's provided here and some of the commitments. One of them I just wanted to call out specifically is working with the neighbors that are directly adjacent I appreciate the changes that have made with the berming, and I think that that's well received by folks. I know there's been some discussion about would a wall of some kind also be in order. So I just wanted to make an appeal that as things move forward, that you continue to work with those members that are directly adjacent, and that they're definitely have a voice and a say in what that final decision is on what sort of screening methods take place. And it would like to hear that as some confirmation in that vein.
You have my word that I and my company will continue to work with the neighborhood to make this project that hopefully everyone will be proud of in the neighborhood.
And specific on the...
I want to be a good neighbor.
Yep.
And by doing that, we work with the neighbors in the neighborhood.
And specifically openness to a wall of some kind or a fencing, if that's the desire of the adjacent neighbors?
A wall or a fence?
Openness to, I know there's a berm currently. I know there was some discussion about whether adjacent neighbors, in particular on and maybe I think they're here, and maybe that we could hear from them, but I would appreciate hearing an openness if the desire there of those neighbors is, along with the berm, to be some sort of fencing, just openness to that is something that you'd look at. In the letter, it seems like you would be open to that based on saying that you'll continue to work with neighbors, but that's something that would be important to me to hear, just some acknowledgement that you'll work with folks and be open to that idea.
I've talked to the neighbor to the south. He's made a request that if he's in the backyard enjoying himself in his lawn chair or whatnot, that vehicles don't shine into his property. I promised him that I would work with him on that. Putting in the berm, neighbor across the street, we put in some additional landscaping to protect that. We will continue to monitor that and watch that. And like I said, we want to be a good neighbor in the neighborhood. And we will do anything and everything we can to make sure that headlights and whatnot do not go into the property. Now, there is something in there that says 100% from the parking lot. There are vehicles when they come down heading east on 66 and they make the right-hand turn onto Stevens. We can't control that. That's just, but we will certainly do everything that we can within our property to limit those headlights going into everyone else's properties.
And openness to a fence?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to be clear on that. Yep.
Well, there is a fence on the First Avenue side. We're putting in a new one there. But then there's also already arborvitaes on the Stevens side of the property that we're going to keep those.
Right.
But then add the berm and more landscaping to restrict the headlights going into the property.
And that's where I know it's not clear in my mind the exact desire. I know there's the desire to keep those arborvitaes, but I've also heard maybe there's a desire for fencing. And I just want to make sure that there's an open dialogue and working with those residents about the kind of screening that works for them. You know, the whole neighborhood has had a voice in this, and I think it's been productive. We've seen some changes, in particular for those adjacent. Just want to make sure that that can move forward in a positive way for everybody. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Nope, and looks like you found the definition.
Mayor Pro Tem, I did. The definition of a convenience store is a small store near a residential area that stocks food and general goods and is open all or most of the day and night.
Thank you.
I would move a motion to, would it be to exclude convenience stores as a use? What would be I'd be looking for staff guidance about what that motion would be.
Right, you could move to amend, you could make an amendment to the resolution to add a stipulation that prohibits convenience stores.
Okay.
All right, well, if we can take note of that, and then we will bring that back up when we are ready to make a motion. We do have a resident here who is going to speak on behalf of the community, so if you could come up, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Hello, good evening, and thank you so much for allowing us to have time to speak again this evening. Thank you all also for coming to the neighborhood. I know you've come in rain and wind and sun and everything, so you've come to the site and talked to us about what we see as the real needs in this community. Tonight you'll be voting on whether to accept the current proposal for the planned unit development at the site. We understand the benefits the city hopes to see from the planned unit development, and the developer expects to gain from such a development. As you know, no one in the neighborhood wants this development. You've heard from many of us through the planning commission meetings, city council meetings, emails, and in person. And I just needed to point that out at the beginning because it kind of sets the stage for what we are going to say, which is we're trying to make it work. Even though we don't want it, we've kind of come from there. Not everyone has, believe me, like to here. And so we're trying to ask for some compromise at this point. We've really tried to understand the positive impact of this development for the city and put our best efforts into creating potential solutions for the most negative impacts, which are traffic, parking issues, and the screening issues for the neighbors that we've talked about immediately adjacent to the development. We've looked at data, we've tried to analyze, and we've tried to come up with some data-based solutions. We think our solution should be based on data and not just on people's kind of guess about what the impact will be. So we feel that our data-based solutions are geared towards acceptance of the project by the neighborhood and integrating it successfully into the R1 zoned neighborhood. The developer has been granted some variances to make this project work from his perspective. We'd like some conditions placed on the planned unit development to make this project work from our perspective. These ideas would mitigate the major issues without a significant negative impact for the development. The mayor requested last week when he visited the site that we put our thoughts about some of these key solutions into a document and send it to him. We sent that document and data from a traffic study specific to this site to the mayor, the city council members, and the planning staff on June 20th. The document and data were not included in the packet for this night's meeting, even though the developer's document from the same date was included. I'll recap the key solutions and data covered in those documents in kind of in brief form, because you've seen them, so I don't need to go through it all for you. As to the screening issue, I don't need to really hammer that because you've just talked about it quite a bit, and that's the screening of the immediately adjacent neighbors. So we don't really need to talk about that anymore. All I can say is just kind of, I'm not one of those people. I'm close to being one of those people right across the street. But it has just felt to me like the conversations has kind of gone in circles. And somehow at this point, I think that the planning department has put some good suggestions on paper. And it seems like it somehow needs to have a time and a place for those solutions to come together. Because we kind of hear the developers working with the neighbors. I'm not necessarily hearing that from the neighbors. I see that the city has some good plans in the document, but somehow it's just not coming together for resolution. And so I think that's critical. We support those mutual solutions and consider them to be a basic requirement for any development with parking spaces facing headlights into homeowners' windows. So that seems to be just something that should happen. Then landscaping is really necessary, but not enough. So very often when we talk about this project, because that's so important, the conversation keeps going back to that. Well, that does need to get resolved. But for the whole surrounding area on First Avenue, across 66th Street, down Stevens Avenue to the south, we need mitigation of traffic and parking issues, and that's essential. The two solutions we are advancing are no restaurants or convenience stores in the planned unit development, and a dead end or partial dead end on 66th and Stevens, since there are two driveways exiting onto this R1 zoned block. And I think in the documents I sent to the council, I described what that might look like. The example is behind the T&T gas station at 66 in Oakland. We did see in the developer's plan a tiny little swing to the, turning to the left, but it was nothing like what appears on 66 in Oakland. We think it needs to happen now, since there are no guarantees it would happen otherwise, ever. How will the traffic counts be monitored? what is the threshold for making the change? We believe it needs to be decided now. And if for some reason that can't happen, although we think it needs to be happen, we think it should be stated when they'll be counted, how they'll be counted, and a written guarantee that if a threshold, certain threshold is met, that change is made. The data about restaurant parking provided in tonight's packet by the city and the traffic counts we have provided indicate that restaurants and convenience stores would make both of those issues, traffic and parking, much worse. Coffee shops and convenience stores at this site will generate up to 1,200 trips per day each. We know that there's space for one restaurant allotted in this development, but a restaurant and a convenience store would generate 2,400 trips a day. Other restaurants that are not fast food would generate more like 200 to 500 trips per day. Restaurants also carry a higher parking requirement, as is in the documents from the city this evening, and the risk is parking spillover down residential streets, especially pertinent since the developer has been given a parking variance for the residential component of this development. So there's 31 units, there's 33 parking spaces. There's an assumption that some of the surface spaces, 6 to 8 of those could be used. But if the restaurant requires 10 spaces per 1,000 square feet, as opposed to 3 to 4 for another type of business, that's just spillover into the residential spots and spillover down the block. So we think that's very pertinent.
Ms. Lipinski, if you can please wrap up your comments. Thank you.
You've all made yourselves available to discuss the issues, and for that we are grateful. To date, our key issues have not been definitively addressed. We think these ideas would mitigate the major issues without a significant negative impact to the development, and would truly appreciate it if you can seriously consider them. We ask you to vote to add conditions to this planned unit development requiring no restaurants or convenience stores and adding a dead end or TNT type dead end to 66 and Stevens Avenue. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, I'll open it up for council discussion before we make a motion and take a vote, and if there's folks that have questions for staff as well. All right, well
I thought somebody else might want to speak. But like I said, I've been meeting with these folks, and we've explored a lot of issues as we're talking about, what's good for the city, and we know that a project is going to happen there, as it should. It's very important because, it's our fiduciary responsibility to make sure that this is a development that will yield a lot of benefits to the city. And having said all of that, I think I spoke last time around on this issue, but I do believe that a convenience store or a restaurant is going to bring so much traffic that it's going to disrupt the neighborhood, the character of this neighborhood. And I'd be willing to, entertain Council Member Howard's reasoning. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to support it, but the other thing is the parking. There are 31 parking spaces underground, but that's still, we're assuming we have 31 apartments and 31 parking spaces underground. A lot of those people are going to have more than one car because they probably live with somebody that also drives, or they might have, some visitors that will come and visit. The other thing is, whatever business is located there, you've got to take into consideration that they're going to have employees in that business, and depending what kind of business it has, it'll have a number of employees, and then it'll have the customers. So that's nothing that we can control, and that's going to put a big strain, I think, in the parking situation. You know, and the other thing that I'm concerned about is a developer. Well, it seems like a nice guy, and it's got, I think, good intentions. We don't really know what type of work he does because he really hasn't done, you know, much in Minnesota, and you know, so to me there's a big blank space there. I know that a lot of landscaping has been improved in the discussion about, you know, the buffering and all of that stuff. It's very important, and it has moved forward quite a bit, but this also leaves the city with really being vigilant in terms of making sure that this development works in terms of, you know, snow removal, in terms of the ice problem that people have cited, in terms of making sure that there's sufficient storage for the snow. I mean, a number of things that are stipulated that the staff will have to be vigilant about making sure that all of these are adhered to. So, having said that, I intend to cast a no vote.
Thank you, Councilmember Garcia. Are there any questions or other comments from council members?
Yeah, I'll speak to it. And I, after making some comments, I think I will move an amendment. But I want to say, globally, you know, I'm very supportive of this project tonight. I think that in taking the broadest view, you know, this development adds value to our community that's beyond just the dollars and cents. It'll add families and friends and amenities for our community to enjoy. Based on the feedback and the conversations I've had with folks across the city, you know, I think this represents progress for our community, for our city. You know, I've talked with a lot of folks over the last several years, I'm sure we all have, about 66th Street and the desire to see that corridor come to life. And, you know, I think that this, looking at the development that we did on 66th, the progress there, to me, this project does represent progress along 66th, and mixed use at this location on 66th in a project like this makes sense and fits with our vision for the future. And I think it is important to call out that this is a way to expand our tax base and lessen the burden on our single-family homeowners in Richfield, who have been feeling the sting of higher property taxes. You know, we've seen home values go up in Richfield. That's a good thing, but that puts a lot of pressure on an increase in property taxes. And there aren't very many locations or opportunities throughout the city to expand our tax base. This is one of them along our major thoroughfare through the city. And our ability to expand housing in Richfield in this location is also a big win. There is a demand for housing in our community, in our region, and to me this is a smart use of that space, to have a huge amount of new housing, but to add several dozen or a dozen or so new neighbors, new families into Richfield, I think is a positive step for the community. Now, all that said, it's very important and I absolutely want to thank the neighbors for engaging in this work in, I think, a very productive and meaningful way. And there's a clear concern for your neighborhood that is driving action and, I think, productive dialogue. And if the city council is going to take action to approve something like this, it's very important to me, I think to all of us, that we're responsive and try to find ways to make this a project that it might not be all the way to full approval or anywhere close, but that we're hearing concerns, and if there are changes that need to be called out, that we're looking at making those. And I appreciate some of the changes that have been made throughout the process in terms of screening and otherwise. I think there's more dialogue that can continue there. In particular, I know we heard tonight again the notion of the kinds of tenants there and what that means to the neighborhood. I'm inclined to support a stipulation and make an amendment related to convenience stores. Just as we heard on the description, there's a reference to open at all hours of the day with convenience stores. I'm not sure that there's a persuasive, huge value add for the community there with convenience stores. You know, I know that what we have, the current language wouldn't permit, you know, a restaurant with full service liquor and whatnot. The permitting of one in 2,000 square foot for the usage of potentially a coffee shop, based on the feedback that I've heard from the community, I think there is a value add there for the community potentially, without huge repercussions in terms of volume of traffic and otherwise. So I see a distinction there. And so to speak to that after my comments, I think in hearing from folks that are open to that amendment. And then I wanted to speak to the commitments from the city, in particular as it relates to parking and the request for either a dead-end street or a pork chop. As I've had conversations with our staff about that, and it's not dissimilar to some other developments where we've heard requests based on a development and kind of a concern of the what if and the concern of the unknown. There is, I think, the right approach to monitor, to first see what the levels of traffic are going to be, the parking is going to be, but then to make that level of commitment to investigate that and be open to change. And what I heard tonight and from talking with residents, a desire for something in writing, for something a little more definitive about what would trigger that level of change, and I think that's reasonable. And so I would just put it out there that, you know, I think in way of writing or otherwise, to put something that gives some definition to the community about levels of threshold of traffic or certain conditions about the level of parking or impacts into the neighborhood that would trigger the kind of dialogue and discussion to make some of those changes. In particular, you know, something like that we see on 66th and Oakland, that type of thing. Seems like if certain levels of traffic are happening as a result of development, that seems to me like a reasonable solution. And so I'd like us as a city to put some kind of definition around about what might trigger that discussion, might trigger that step. But I know based on our previous developments, there's an absolute sincere desire to, on a very real basis, monitor what the impacts of these developments are, and if it's creating some sort of outcome, there's a willingness to be proactive and make a change. I'm very confident of that we will make that commitment and follow through. So, you know, in kind of closing, as I've thought about this project, you know, any change is challenging, but in this instance, I really feel like the value that this adds to the community, to the city, is clear and there, and that the input of the neighbors has improved the project, and the commitment needs to be there on an ongoing basis to help make this the best project possible for the neighborhood going forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Howard. Councilmember Troutman.
I'd echo a lot of the comments of my colleagues here, and really appreciate both the way that the communities come together and provided feedback, and their commitment to that, and their commitment to Richfield. I love this community. I've spent the better part of my life here, and you guys reflect it really well. And so I just want to say thank you for that. I'm going to support the project. One of the challenges as I wrestle with this, because I have heard your concerns and take them very seriously, is I'm looking at a couple of outcomes. One is that if this project goes through, and it will be uncomfortable for a lot of people, and at the end your property values will go up, and it will be a great development. Or I could be wrong, and it could be uncomfortable, and we could go a couple years, and people will still be unhappy. And so I don't take that lightly. Councilmember Garcia said this on a number of occasions, that there was a time when our community was built, we had an entire community and business model of single-family homes, and we did not want business. We did not want development. That is, we are still living through the consequences of that model, that because of changes in government aid, local government aid, and things like, is just not financially viable at all for a city. And I think that can't be, it's one of the realities that we have to deal with, that we're still shifting from a model of single-family homes that won't sustain us. And considering what the feedback that we get from all of our 36,000 residents about where our taxes should be and how they should develop, we need more projects like this. I'm glad for Mr. Lynch's interest in this development. I'm also glad that as we develop that commercial and retail space, which supports the community, from a connectivity point of view, but also from a financial point of view, it's pushed forward towards 66th Street, not like the other apartments that are pushed back right up, slammed up against the homes. I feel like that's one of the big wins that also makes it more walkable, which I appreciate. And so those, I think, are big, bolder development visions that I think should be a model for other developments. I'm a little bit on the fence with the convenience store, just because I don't think that any modern iteration of a convenience store would actually work in that space. And I don't know, because we're looking 20 years from now down the road, if there wouldn't be a small store that would sell food that wouldn't at some future day be viable. And I suppose we could revisit it at that point, but I guess that's kind of I'm on the fence about that.
Thank you, Councilmember Troutman. I had a few clarifying questions. So what does the accountability look like in terms of when we talk about working with the adjacent neighbors as the process moves forward?
Mayor Pro Tem, there are stipulations written into the resolution that require the developer to work with the adjacent owners. I'll read some specific language to you. This is regarding the screening. We've put some specific criteria in regarding opacity to make sure that those headlights are blocked, and then the language states that the developer shall work with the property owner at 6616 Stevens Avenue. We've specifically called out the address, to devise a mutually acceptable screening solution along the shared property line in accordance with the opacity requirements listed. And then regarding the property owner across the street, 6615 Stevens, the developer shall install plantings on the property or boulevard area to mitigate headlight impacts. And that's with the consent and cooperation of the property owner. We can't require that of the developer without the consent of that property owner. That property owner would have to agree to that, but it is a stipulation in the resolution.
Thank you. And then I have two more clarifying questions. As Councilmember Howard said, looking for a little more clarification or timeline around the traffic counts and the studies and the thresholds, what kind of information can you give? I know we have put that in the resolutions where we would do traffic counts and studies. Can you just talk about that piece a little more with more specificity?
Sure, that's correct. There's a stipulation in the resolution that says that the Public Works Department will monitor traffic counts and patterns following the completion of the development. We have not put a timeline in here because we don't know a timeline for completion of the development. And also we will be waiting for 66th Street to finish depending on when those projects coincide. So there is not a timeline. In terms of thresholds, I can tell you that our general threshold along a major arterial like 66th Street is 1,000 cars per day before the Public Works Department would do something to mitigate those effects. This street has a particularly low traffic count now, and so in the conversations that I have had with the city engineer, that threshold would likely be lower than the usual 1,000 cars per day. That said, I don't think anyone was ready to put a specific number on that, partly because we didn't have an official count for that street. We had an official count for Stevens Avenue, north of 66th Street. So they're committed to monitoring those patterns, using our tubes, where we do that throughout the city. We're committed to that on other developments as well, but a specific number was not put on that.
Mayor Pro
Councilmember
Tem.
Troutman.
I'll just say this, for my vote. We don't have a specific number, but if these folks aren't happy, we need to do something about it. So as you guys go through that, as we go through this process, and if we find that there's high traffic, and I'd really look for feedback from the community, and they're saying this is high, we don't like this, and we can put signs in, that's all it's going to take for my vote to say we should put some signs in. We should give them some relief. So I'll just put that on the record.
Thank you. And then just another clarifying question. Can you just explain, I know convenience stores was discussed already. I'm just bringing up a couple things that weren't discussed up here. And then can you explain for everybody what the Class 3 restaurant designation is, and then also include any sales of liquor on site, please?
Yes, just a second. I'm going to pull up the definition so I can read it to you. Okay, a Class 3 restaurant is a fast food or convenience restaurant. So restaurants where most customers order and are served their food at a counter or in a motor vehicle, and packages prepared to leave the premises or able to be taken to a table or counter to be consumed. That is separate from a drive-in restaurant, and we have eliminated the opportunity for there to be a drive-in restaurant. So essentially, a Class 3 restaurant could be fast food, but again, no drive-in component. A Class 1 restaurant is a full-service restaurant. That's a restaurant where food and intoxicating beverage can be served. That is not permitted in these districts. The zoning code just does not prohibit it. So it isn't specifically listed in your resolution because it's not allowed to begin with.
Thank you very much. Those are the clarifying questions that I had before the comments. I'm not going to repeat a lot of what has been said here already up here, but Richfield is not in a position to be making decisions on if we can accept redevelopment or not, or accepting change or not. Change is here, change is coming, and as some of the council members has stated, there's a lot of pressure on our community, and we really have limited space in terms of what we can redevelop and what we can use to more broadly support our tax base. And so the way that I think of my role as a council member is really not saying yes or no to change, but how are we all going to work together to influence what that change looks like, and how it's going to benefit our community as a whole, and how it's going to impact our neighbors. And that is what I do think we are doing today. I do think that the community members have been working very hard to really share their concerns with council members, with the developer. Changes have been made with the developer and with the city, and we are going to continue to address these issues together so that this development coming to our community will be at the benefit of everybody. And that's, the reason that I will be supporting this development. I do want to say thank you to the community members for all of the work that you've been doing, and we need to continue to be working together. And there are several stipulations that are put in the resolution to keep the developer accountable and to be moving forward together. So with that, are there any other comments before we make a motion?
I will move an amendment to include the stipulation to prohibit convenience stores in this resolution.
Second. So, excuse me, one question. Do we have Councilmember Howard make the motion, the entire motion, and then include the amendment?
Mayor Pro Tem and Council, I would suggest acting on Councilmember Howard's motion first.
Okay.
On whether or not to amend the resolution, vote on that, and then proceed with the most recommended action.
Okay.
After you vote on the proposed amendment.
So Councilmember Howard made the motion. I will second it. All in favor?
Aye.
All not in favor?
Aye.
The amendment is passed. Now, I will make the motion to approve a second reading of an ordinance rezoning 101 66th Street East from single-family residential to planned mixed use, and adopt a resolution granting a conditional use permit and final development plan for a planned unit development at 101 66th Street East.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Those not in favor?
Aye. Nay.
The motion is passed. Thank you. Our next item, council for consideration, is the consideration of a variety of land use requests related to the proposal to construct condominiums, townhomes, and apartments on the northern portion of the former Lindell Garden Center property and adjacent single-family property. The Lindell Garden Center closed its doors in 2006. The property was purchased by Cornerstone Group in 2011, and an overall development plan including 151 apartments, a grocery store, 11,000 square feet of retail restaurant space, and outdoor activity space was approved by the City Council in March of 2013. The Lake Winds Cooperative opened the business in 2014 on the south half of the site, but plans of the housing and additional retail space stalled and approvals have expired. The Cornerstone Group has continued to work on the project, completing shoreline improvements last year and now moving forward with North Point Bay Companies to redevelop the northern portion of the site with a variety of housing types. In addition to the former Lindell Garden Center land, the Cornerstone Group has purchased one single-family home to the north, 6328 Aldrich Avenue. This property is proposed to be rezoned and included in the development. The current proposal includes 30 for-sale condominiums along the shoreline of Richfield Lake, 8 rental townhomes and 66 apartments in a 3-story building adjacent to Lindell Avenue. Parking for the condominiums will be provided underground in an accessory garage building that takes advantage of the elevation change of the north of the property. Parking for the townhomes and apartments will be provided in a parking podium that occupies approximately 2/3 of the street level of the apartment buildings and the surface lot. Along Lindell Avenue, the street level of the apartment building includes common areas and walkout units. The proposed density of the project is lower than originally proposed and lower than currently permitted by the comprehensive plan. However, the draft comprehensive plan calls for lowering densities at the edge of Richfield's downtown mixed-use district, where a lower density could be used to transition to adjacent single-family neighborhood. The proposed 33-unit acre development fits within the proposed transition density range, and the developers have requested a comprehensive plan amendment to allow this density now rather than waiting for the final approval of the comp plans this fall. Parking for the apartment townhome portion of the project is provided at the lower ratio than normally allowed. North Bay has submitted a statement in support of their proposed parking, indicated that the proposal provides 2 spaces for each townhome and 1 for each apartment. North Bay believes that the studio units will almost entirely be occupied by a single person, and that in some cases these renters may not own a car, but instead rely on bicycle and mass transit. Additionally, the future retail development to the south will provide overflow parking. Retail parking will not be constructed until final plans for the retail development have been approved. The proposed project meets a number of goals of the comprehensive plan and the vision the community has for this area. The project diversifies Richfield's housing offerings, improving the Lindell Avenue gateway to the community, takes full advantage of the amenities of Richfield Lake, provides quality open space and public art, and minimizes the need for vehicle use by providing housing immediately adjacent to recreation and grocery. Staff recommends approval of the proposed project. Any additional comments from staff on this? This is an open hearing. Is anybody here to comment on this project? This is a public hearing. Is anybody? Oh.
It's not a public hearing.
I'm sorry. I thought it was listed as a public hearing. Okay. Any council discussion before we make a motion?
Well, I wanted to mention one thing, this has been in the works for a long, long time. It's on again, off again type of thing. But I will say one thing, that if we do need like a model of if you're going to be a developer, what to do and what not to do. And I think these folks have had the type of neighborhood meetings that are well advertised, and they do a lot of advertising on their own, that are planned ahead, and that really solicit comments, and that really respond well to those comments. It's not a real adversarial relationship. So, I think we can learn a lot from this type of development versus the other type. But I think a lot of it has to do with, what the city does in terms of promoting, in working with the developer when they know that that the neighbors have got a real investment and real input into what's going on. And so I would commend, the developer, Colleen Carey, those folks that have worked hard. And again, Ms. Paleman, who is, I think she puts on her thinking cap more often than not. So once in a while, loan it to Mr. Devich. Anyway, so I just wanted to offer those comments.
Thank you, Councilmember Garcia. Would anybody else like to make a comment on this?
I'll just say it's exciting to see this project moving forward, and I just want to underscore something that was in the staff report, just because I think it really states well the benefits of this project, that we're diversifying Richfield's housing options, we're improving Lindale Avenue, the gateway into the community. We're taking full advantage of that location and what it means for the city, utilizing open space and public art and community assets, and making this a walkable, bikeable downtown center. It's just a real great addition that fits with the vision of where we're headed in that area of the city in downtown Richfield, and it's exciting to see it moving forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Howard. Any final comments? Nope. Now, just a logistical question on passing these motions. Do we do 3 separate motions, or can we put them together and pass them with one?
Mayor Pro Tem, I would suggest that you do separate motions only because you're amending the comprehensive plan, and so that's a separate requirement. So.
Okay, excellent. Well, then we will go one by one. So I will make the motion to adopt a resolution that amends the Richfield Comprehensive Plan to designate lots 1 through 2, Block 1, Lindale Gardens Addition, and 6328 Aldrich Avenue as mixed use, and allow a housing development that is less than 50 dwellings per acre.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The resolution is passed. Would someone like to make a motion on the second one?
Well, I'll make a motion that we approve a second reading of the ordinance that amends Richfield zoning code Appendix 1 to designate 6328 Aldrich Avenue as planned mixed uses.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion is passed. And I will make the motion to adopt a resolution approving a conditional use permit and final development plans for a planned unit development of lots 1 and 2, Block 1, Lindale Gardens, 2nd Edition.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The motion is passed. Thank you. The next council item goes to Councilmember Howard.
I have consideration of the adoption of a resolution of denial for a therapeutic massage enterprise license for Longshe Incorporated. On May 14th, 2018, staff received a therapeutic massage enterprise license application for Longshee Incorporated. The required background investigation was completed, and the public safety director is recommending the application for the therapeutic massage enterprise license be denied because the applicant misrepresented or falsified information on the license application and did not meet the eligibility criteria under city code. Adoption of a resolution is necessary to formalize the denial of licensure and provide a written record of the council's basis for denial, which is why this is before us today.
Any comments on this from council members? Or any additional comments from staff?
Mayor Pro Tem and council members, this application has been in the works for, I think, probably 3.5 months now. An initial application was submitted back in early April. It was fairly lacking some basic information, so Chief Henthorn and I invited the applicant in and also used the language line for translation services to ensure that he fully understood documentation that was needed to complete the application. He then came back about 3 weeks later, provided that information, and through the background investigation completed by the police department, there was indications that the information that he had provided was not legitimate.
Thank you very much.
And Mayor Pro Tem and Council, I just wanted you to know that staff did make the applicant aware of tonight's meeting as well. He was notified in writing, and so he's not present here, but we wanted you to know that he was notified.
Thank you very much. All right.
I'll make the motion to adopt a resolution of denial of the therapeutic massage enterprise license application of Longshee Incorporated.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is passed. The next item is the city manager's report.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, members of the City Council, I really don't have a separate report to make this evening.
Thank you very much, city manager. And lastly, we have claims and payroll.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I will move claims and payroll.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Claims and payroll is passed. And with that, we conclude tonight's meeting. Thank you, everybody.